Welcome to the Living Centred podcast, a podcast all about learning together how to live lives which are centred on Jesus. Everyone lives centred on something. Our goal is to learn together how every area of our lives, everything about who we are and how we live, can be increasingly oriented around Jesus and transformed by Jesus. He invites us to a rich and satisfying life, where the good news that he truly is enough changes everything about how we relate to God, ourselves, and the world. In each episode, a different person shares about what it's looking like for them to seek to centre their life on Jesus right now. As we hear their stories, we get to learn together and to encourage one another in what it means for Jesus to be at the centre of our lives. This is a journey we are all invited to, and a conversation we all get to be a part of. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, my name is Adrian, and it's so good to welcome you to this week's episode of the Living Centred podcast. It is my privilege to introduce today Kate, who will be sharing this week. Kate, it is amazing to see you.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
Well, good. I'm glad you're pleased to be here. I wonder if you could just start by telling us a bit about yourself, who you are, and what your life looks like at this point in time.
Yeah, of course. As mentioned, my name is Kate. I'm married to Dave. I work as a physio and I like to play hockey, enjoy board games, and I love to read.
Fantastic. That's a great look in.
Yeah.
We jump in immediately with the big question, which is this. What does living centred on Jesus look like for you right now?
And it's definitely a big question. It took me a bit of time to think about what it kind of summarises as. Yeah. And I kind of came up with, for me, I think at the moment, the big thing I'm learning is how to submit every area of my life to God, like actually including work, friendships, relationships. And the big one for me that God's been teaching me off over the last kind of few months has been a lot about submitting my identity and insecurities to God.
Wow.
But yeah, it's been a really exciting journey. God just started talking to me about how my insecurities can often be louder than what I hear him saying. And actually the link between insecurity and obedience or disobedience. And the impact that has, that actually the challenge to trust God's truth above what the world says, and how deeply that is linked with insecurity and sin. And I find myself wandering the most from him when I'm caught up in those insecurities, when I don't listen to him, when I turn away. So yeah, learning to submit that and let him be God and be the centre over things like my insecurities.
Wow.
Has been, it's an exciting journey.
Wow, it sounds exciting, but it also sounds daunting, painful sometimes even. Yeah.
I found God start to talk to me about it in kind of October time, so it's been a several months journey. But even the challenge of it came gently, which was just, a really loving challenge. Yeah. We were away and God started talking to me about it, and actually not straight away challenging me in a painful way, but actually just starting to talk to me in ways that I hadn't really thought about it before. And in that also like the challenge of things like the world talks so much about loving yourself and those sort of things, but actually God's version is different and better. Like actually, so one of the things I was then thinking about and praying about was like actually, what does God's view of self-worth and self-image look like compared to the world? And his way is so much better and bigger and more and full of freedom. It's been really exciting. It's a journey.
It sounds profound. It sounds life-changing.
Yeah.
And I guess in that, it seems like it's something like to say, I'm going to live submitting every area of my life and my insecurities to God. Like, sounds like something that in one sense is really easy, to say.
Yeah.
But it sounds pretty complex and hard to do.
Yeah.
And I guess what's helping you seek to live that way?
People. People are the thing that changes it and makes it easier. For me, like actually surrounding myself with people who I trust, who will speak truth, who I can be vulnerable with. That's the big difference, is learning to be vulnerable with people, to allow people to see your insecurity, to speak truth into it and challenge it.
And is that something, just to push you slightly, because I think that can be a big thing, to trust people.
Yeah.
And for some of us, that can come easier than others. And where would you fit on that scale? Is that something that I'm just straight in, here's everything of who I am? Or are you more someone where that is more of a decision to start to work towards trusting someone?
Trusting someone with my vulnerability is very much a challenge.
Yeah.
And so I am absolutely an extrovert. My husband calls me an extrovert to a pathological degree, which is probably fair. But actually, I'm also, growing up, was very, very shy and very hard. Like, I've always enjoyed being around people, but found it very, very hard to be vulnerable with people. Yeah. And actually, it's something that I've learned probably more in the last 5 years than ever before, to learn to be vulnerable with people and to choose to be more vulnerable and let people see. Like, before then, probably there were a handful of people, but learning to do it more. And actually the freedom that you get from doing that more. Like, totally. It's really, really cool journey to learn that actually vulnerability is so great. The depth of relationship you get. And like the actual ability to live in a community that knows you. Like a biblical image of community and love and friendship, because it's built on something deep and real. That's so cool. So it's been a journey.
It's so good. It is that cost of vulnerability. And yet, as you said, like the payoff is just unbelievable, because what you then get to belong to with others from that place of, I'm accepted for who I am. Yeah.
It makes such a big difference.
That's huge. I guess with it then, what are you discovering about God as Father, Son and Spirit through all of this?
I've just learned so much more of God's grace and compassion and his character, like actually being able to see who God is through other people as well. When you've got that depth of vulnerability and relationship, actually God shows himself in so many ways. I mean, and all of the bits and the challenging bits, the difficult parts, the easy parts, like just the grace and compassion that I've seen in God, and like the joy of living in community. That's been such an exciting discovery, like learning more the joy of deep community and deep connection. And I've really found the joy in obedience. And like the freedom you get in obedience. Like it seems like a dirty word often in the world to be obedient, and it seems like a negative thing, but actually I found when I've been challenged to be obedient, what God's got for me is so much bigger, so much better. There's so much more life in it, and so much more freedom, that actually what God calls us to is a much better life than the world has over us. And when I've wandered in my insecurity and end up with the world things, they've paled in comparison to actually the freedom of living in obedience, because actually God's way is better. There's so much joy to be found in that, the fullness of life that God offers.
Oh, it's so good. I think increasingly, I find myself just the joy of obedience. And you feel like those two words shouldn't go hand in hand, and yet they really do. And I think that's what you're expressing. It's just a delight to hear. I guess then, to land this with a final question.
Okay.
Is, like, how are you changing? If we were to meet Kate of 3 months ago, say, or 6 months ago, like, how would you be different to who you are now today?
This is a question I struggled with the most, I think. But actually, I think I've become a lot more open and willing to be vulnerable. That's a big thing that we've talked about. But also, like, willing to take on new things. So Dave has been trying to convince me for the last couple of years to join the choir. And I didn't because out of insecurity. Like, what would it feel like? Would I want to be on stage, etc.? And this year, as he asked me, I was like, I'm not sure. And then felt God can be like, be obedient. This is an insecurity.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, to be obedient, I'm going to have to join the choir. And I loved it. And it was so good. And I had such a great time. But it's also more than that. Actually, the freedom in doing that has changed how I worship now. So like actually the freedom that I have in worship, because I was obedient and God revealed more of himself, and I felt so much freedom in doing that. I really loved it, really enjoyed it. Actually, my focus in worship is so much more focused on God rather than the insecurity that I feel being surrounded by people and what if they can hear me and things like that. Actually, my focus in worship is now much more God rather than me. So it's changed me in terms of now willing to take on more things that God challenges me to do. And he often gives that little poke of, it's time to be obedient. Amazing. And you're like,
Oh, it's so good, Kate. So, so good. So exciting just to hear what God's doing in you and through you, which is just, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I think for me, I'm going to be considering, not surprisingly, all that you shared about submitting. I think this coming week, I just want to have a practice of saying, okay, am I seeking to submit every area of my life? Is there any area that I'm not seeking to do that in? And just to offer that to God and say, God, I want to submit this to you and be obedient to you. How about you, my listening friends? What are you going to be considering out of all that Kate has shared with us so excellently today? What are you going to be considering this coming week? Lastly, I want to thank you for listening, and I pray, would you know more of the wonder of living centered on Jesus this coming week?
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of the Living Centered podcast. New episodes are released every Monday, and if you enjoyed this episode, please do like and subscribe on your chosen podcast provider to receive them direct each week. Living Centered is produced by the team at Oasis Church in Birmingham, UK, and you can find out more and get in touch with the team via theoasischurch.com.